Nate, firstly, thank you so much for agreeing for this session today on multi-carrier shipping strategy and rate shopping. So, before we begin with the main discussion, Nate, would like to know from you something about your professional experience. For our viewers.
My name is Nate Skiver. I'm founder of LPF Spend Management, which is an e-commerce delivery consulting company. I've been consulting for 3 years, really working with package shippers primarily to help them negotiate better parcel contracts, but also source the right carriers and services that align with their shipping strategy. Prior to the 3-year tenure as a consultant, I was in retail for 17 years. Spent 11 years with Abercrombie and Fitch. A lot of that was focused on parcel management, but also e-commerce, and then most recently was with Gap Inc. In a parcel role. Before I decided in 2019 to move out on my own, and I've been consulting for right around 3 years now.
Diving into the main topic, I would like to begin by referring to one of your recent LinkedIn posts where you compared the partial shipping strategies of 2007 to the current times of 2022. So would just like to know from you, like, what brought out that thought, and how is the partial shipping strategy different or has evolved during the last 15-20 years?
Well, the part of the idea behind that post was actually based on my career experience. So I started in parcel in 2007, so it's been a little bit, and with all of the things that have gone on, not just in the past 15 years, but really even in the past, I'll say 3 in the market, is that there's really stark contrast. And so, 15 years ago, that the parcel market was very different, and a lot of that had to do with the stage of e-commerce at that time, and how shipping or parcel supported it. And so at that point, e-commerce was, I think, less than 4% of retail sales. And at this point, I believe we're probably close to the 15% range. So if we're at 4%, then the package volume for residential delivery and e-commerce was still a relatively small percentage of total package volume that UPS and FedEx and some other carriers had in the network. And so at that point, a lot of the deliveries were commercial deliveries. They're more efficient, and there were also fewer players in the market. So that's a huge difference. UPS and FedEx, of course, were the dominant, I guess, carriers then. I don't know if that's the right word now, but they definitely influenced the market a lot. And so there were few options outside of UPS and FedEx. The Postal Service, regional carriers really weren't in the market much on the residential delivery side because there wasn't a whole lot of volume. They focused on commercial B2B shipments. And so since there wasn't a lot of competition, in that case, though, UPS and FedEx were a little bit more competitive, at least with each other, trying to win, we'll say, a lot of that commercial business. The ones that it's more efficient, they can drive better pricing, but also some margin on it. And back then, a retailer could leverage all of their volume, and a lot of it was the commercial. So that's attractive to carriers. All of your volume with maybe one carrier, UPS or FedEx, and help to drive down rates to really negotiate, because there was at least competition between those two. And you fast forward 15 years or even 12 years, right around the time of the pandemic, there's been really an explosion of volume, package volume in the US, and the majority, if not all, of that growth recently has been in e-commerce and residential delivery. And that type of delivery is relatively inefficient for many carriers. It's higher cost, so that means it's higher cost for their customers and retailers. And if it's a higher percentage of their total volume, then costs are just going to continue to rise. So what that's resulted in is a need to consider other carriers for a variety of reasons, not just expense, but to have options with speed to customer. I mentioned regionals earlier. They've emerged over the last several years and have become an important, I think, option for retailers. So now there are many options. UPS and FedEx still influence the market quite a bit, and such that putting all of your volume, all of your eggs in one basket isn't as effective. It's not, and especially if you have a lot of e-commerce volume, and so there's a need to diversify and use multiple carriers, and that, I think, to kind of sum it up, that need of using multiple carriers is probably the biggest change that's happened in the last 15 years. There's a lot more, of course, but
yeah, Nate, thank you so much for that elaboration. And you rightly pointed out that a lot of e-commerce traffic has shifted from being more of a B2B to more of a B2C volume. And this change needs a change in strategy for retailers too. And you also pointed out in your LinkedIn post as well that carrier diversification is actually essential to strike that balance between operational flexibility and expense management for most of the retail brands. So, Nate, as a founder of LPF Spend Management, so I'm sure you are speaking to a lot of retailers day in, day out. So, could you help us walk through some of the challenges that most of the retailers that you spoke to are facing with respect to a single carrier strategy? And in your view, does this strategy of having a single carrier manage all your volumes, does it really get those better discounts to retailers, or is it just a myth that we want to bust today?
the single carrier model, it's not that it can't work, or it's always inferior to a multi-carrier shipping strategy, but I think it really limits options and flexibility is probably the simplest way to say it. UPS and FedEx, largely they can offer services that meet the needs of most companies and handles or can support the volume, whether it's commercial, residential, all different shapes and sizes and weights. But if you're only working with one carrier, if your business changes, if you have something that doesn't fit nicely within their program, then you don't have an option to really influence it. You're not going to go to a UPS and FedEx and say, I want you to customize everything you do for me. That's not going to happen. And so
Exactly.
there's that part to where you're a bit inflexible. You don't have options. The other then, the question about the rates and the expense, is that if you're working with one carrier, now if you've got a very strong relationship, very close collaboration, then there's likely value provided from that carrier that is sufficient, but you really don't, again, have a strong ability to influence from a negotiation standpoint or rates if there's no really incentive, aside from just being a good partner, to from that carrier to provide concessions on rates. And what happens is if you've got a lot of volume and it's only with one carrier, the benefit of doing that, there's a point of diminishing returns. So if you ship 10 million packages and it's all with one carrier, well, if you ship 13 million, you grow, you're not really going to get a really strong pricing benefit if you're only talking to one carrier. There's no competition. They don't have a lot of incentive to provide additional discounts because they know they have the revenue anyway. And so that's where I think, and we'll talk a lot more, I'm sure, about the multi-carrier piece, but that opens up a lot of flexibility, whereas single carrier may work for some companies. Perhaps their business doesn't change often. The services one carrier provides, without a doubt, always meets their needs. I think that's usually the exception, though.
Thank you for elaborating on that. And you rightly mentioned that by and large, maybe whatever single carrier strategy worked in the past, but then in future, the multi-carrier strategy is something that retailers should actually look into because it can really get them the benefits that they are looking for as shippers. Now we would like to move this discussion towards a more of a multi-shipping strategy approach. So in your opinion, how important is it for retailers to do carrier rate shopping who are actually looking to adopt this multi-carrier shipping strategy?
Well, it's really important, certainly to manage and optimize might be a strong word because it's challenging, but to manage the expense portion. And so there's a lot that goes in, of course, to rate shopping. So just the general concept of either calculating a rate or maybe it's an API call to a carrier with variables provided and then a rate is returned. But if you've got multiple carriers in place, then the expense absolutely is a large portion. I guess the decision-making process, the automated, hopefully, decision-making process, calculating the rate to understand, what the total cost will be, hopefully inclusive of different surcharges based on, say, if it's residential, that will cost different than if it's commercial. Calculating, fuel surcharge, all those things to get the total cost of the package. But you can't or shouldn't probably do that only without some awareness of transit times. And if you go several steps further, then transit times also paired with maybe a customer promise date or a required delivery date. And so you can already see if you've got multiple carriers, which I think there's value in because you have options, you have to weigh not just the cost, but also the delivery time. You can go way beyond that and get into delivery reliability and probabilities and things like that. But that kind of optimal decision-making process allows you to both hopefully manage the expense well, so you're shipping the least cost option to then also meet the customer promise date or whatever delivery date has been established is required. And at its kind of core, that's really carrier rate shopping. And if you're not doing that, then either the expense and or the delivery transit time is going to suffer or just won't be as accurate. If you're not calculating that rate with every package, then you're just kind of making an assumption to say all packages that are 2 to 5 pounds are going to ship UPS ground and aren't looking to see if there's either a faster or cheaper alternative. Then it's just it's inefficient, and it's something that I think some brands and companies are aware of, but maybe they're not utilizing something that does carrier rate shopping, or they're not aware of it, and then there really isn't they don't identify the need to go explore solutions. So I think that's changed over the last several years. I think the awareness is generally there.
Yes, completely agree, Nate. Like previously, I think a lot of manual intervention was being done by retailers, to find the best possible rate to ship a parcel. But then you rightly mentioned that some sort of automation has come in, and actually it is needed because, like you said, there are a number of factors involved in order to get an accurate rate shopping result, and those factors include your delivery dates, the dimensions, your fulfillment center locations, where it is being shipped, what kind of inventory diversification is available. So in order to incorporate all these things, you rightly mentioned that some sort of automation has to be there in place. Otherwise, retailers might end up sacrificing either on the expenses side of things or on the customer experience side of things. During our discussions with most of the retailers, we normally figured out that most of the times retailers and even 3PL partners are doing the rate shopping at the post-purchase stage, which is somewhat around the shipping label printing stage. So I just wanted to get your thoughts into how useful can carrier rate shopping be in the pre-purchase experience of the shopper?
It's a great question. So I'll preface it by saying I don't have a lot of data to support all this, but at least from my experience and directly, and then and working with clients, prior retail experience, I think there's a can be a massive difference in the value created in being able to accurately execute a rate shopping, pre-purchase versus post-purchase. And I mean, one of the ways is that it requires really good information, data as inputs prior to, during browsing or even during checkout. And what that can do is then you're moving kind of that shipping option and surfacing that, sharing that with the customer further up into the process. And when you do that, if you're able to optimize based on a lot of different criteria, you mentioned several, even going as far as order value or item value, and
Yes.
incorporating that item margin. But if you're able to make that calculation on the product display page or maybe in checkout and show a customer, because maybe she lives 20 miles away from the fulfillment center that that order will be fulfilled from, we'll offer next day free ground. Uh, she doesn't know that, but it says free shipping. It's going to deliver tomorrow. Well, that's because we're performing carrier rate shopping, calculating the rate for whichever carrier it happens to be who is providing that service, and it's at the right cost. Perhaps we've taken into account margin, and now we know that we can surface that. If you wait until after, post purchase, then you're missing a huge opportunity, I think, uh, at the very least for engagement and then hopefully conversion. At best, there's a like surprise and delight kind of aspect of doing that post purchase. At worst, you've lost a customer. I think that concept or the ability to do that, showing that personalized delivery option or delivery date, pre checkout even, is one of the biggest missed opportunities in e-commerce logistics, honestly. And for some retailers, understandably, it is very complex because of the inventory. So that's a whole nother topic, the complexity of sourcing an order and where will it ship from. But I think some brands who maybe they only ship from one fulfillment center, they don't ship from stores, then that becomes, in my opinion, it should just be an expectation then that you're able to do it and do it before, certainly before the order's placed, but hopefully even before checkout.
I would like to bring you to another of your popular LinkedIn posts where you talked about multi-shipping carrier solutions in order to enable and optimize the carrier base. So I just wanted to know from you, do you think there are any retailers who are doing it right? And what would be your suggestions to retailers who want to follow this path of opting a multi-shipping carrier solution in order to optimize their shipping and delivery operation?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there aren't, this is going to sound critical, but there aren't as many maybe brands or retailers that I would expect who do this really well, or maybe obviously do it really well. And I'll tell you what that means here in a second. Pre checkout, even. So, what I look for, and we kind of already touched on a little bit, is certainly when browsing, is based on the location of where a customer is located currently while browsing, is showing that delivery option, estimated delivery date on a product display page. And to be able to do that, like we talked, you should also be performing a rate calculation, something to be able to support that, so you know that that's when the order can be delivered. So there aren't many, I think. Maybe it's because I also don't purchase a whole lot myself. So who do it really well. I think Nordstrom is one who has always placed a focus on the delivery aspect, of delivery experience from a customer standpoint. So they've usually done a good job, even though they are one of the retailers that have inventory complexity and they ship from stores and fulfillment centers. A couple of others. There's Hibbett Sports actually does a good job as well. Also, a focus on that part of the customer experience. And then another one, which is, I'll just say, this is an anecdote I'll share here from, you've mentioned my content. Someone reached out actually through LinkedIn and was asking for some feedback on really a part of this process. So the company is called Berkey Filters, and they've got several distribution centers across the US. I think they have vendors who do drop shipping as well. So, I went onto the website and selected a couple of things, and I had a next day delivery option, I think, that was free because I met the threshold. And it was because they were able to surface that and know where it was going to ship from while I was browsing. So it doesn't have to be the largest retailers only who have the ability to do it. But I was asked for feedback. I provided feedback to somebody who reached out, and it was a good experience. So I think those are some examples. Appear to be doing it well. And I would say for some who aren't, or maybe aren't focused on that, there's no easy way to solve it usually, if inventory is complex where you're sourcing it from. But I think at the very least, to explore solutions to get as close as you can to optimizing that and providing something that is reliable and very clear in checkout and then also on the product display page. That's something that should be made a priority, I think. Maybe it won't be as precise, and you won't be able to offer free next day delivery, but if you can provide a very clear estimated delivery date that is going to be delivered 4 days from now versus giving me a little graphic that is static that says 3 to 5 business days, that does nothing for me. I think there's a lot of value there. So I know it's kind of a general answer, but I'm still surprised by how, relatively speaking, few retailers do it well. So I think there's plenty of opportunity.
Yeah, and whatever you have spoken, it's actually real gold for us as a company and also for the retailers who are hearing this conversation. So yeah, Nate, with the holiday season around, I was tempted to ask you this. So what would be your top 2 or 3 suggestions to retailers so that they end up having a really good holiday season this year?
Yeah, well, it's a little difficult since we're almost into if you want to call it peak season or holiday season,
Yeah.
Q4. Those are relatively, I think, synonymous at this point. Is that hopefully the planning's done. If not, then that would be the first recommendation would be to finalize the the peak plan. That goes kind of spans the entire both from a kind of front end planning, promotions, merchandising, all those fun things, inventory, to operational execution on fulfillment and delivery. So I'm assuming that that's all been done. In that case, then I would say is having flexibility incorporated in some way into those plans would be my suggestion. I know it's really general, but and that can be in a few different ways. Hopefully, a multi-carrier shipping program is already in place. Again, if it's not, kind of too late to start that. But let's just assume it is then having the flexibility to move volume to different carriers depending on situations as things arise throughout peak. That's one that has always provided value, and right now it still will, even though there might not be this massive amount of package volume that overwhelms everyone's networks like happened 2 years ago. There still will be times where there's constraints, whether it's UPS or FedEx or another carrier is experiencing some network challenges, being able to move that volume to a different carrier. That, I think, is one example of flexibility. Now, another, kind of going the opposite direction, is if things are going really well. So if carriers are performing well, the fulfillment team is turning orders really quickly, and it's getting into middle of December, and the shipping deadline, the order cutoff for your standard shipping you had in place was say the 15th of December, maybe wouldn't recommend this without a lot of diligence. You actually push that a little bit. You extend it. You take advantage of that opportunity that things are going really well. Maybe even invest a little bit in expediting shipping if you have to drive some conversion there at the end. Don't do that if things aren't going well, or if there's risk associated with pushing that deadline. But I think bottom line is having flexibility in the plan is what I would recommend. Other than that, one thing would be is to really focus on close communication and collaboration with your core partners. So I always focus on delivery in some way. So the carrier is in place, really close communication. Usually that does happen in the fourth quarter, obviously on a daily basis, but multiple times per day to make sure that you're aligned on pickups, the capacity, the state of the network, the service levels, to make sure that there's close communication between those operational teams, so that if there is issues, then you're going to surface those back up to other parts of the organization. So I would say generically, flexibility and communication would be the two.
Thank you so much for those really nice suggestions for holiday season for our viewers. So it's been a thrilling conversation, Nate. And before we end this conversation, I would just like to know from you, what are your future plans and how can our audience reach out to you whenever they need your help?
Yes. So, I'm going to continue to well, I'll just start with content. So that is, one thing that I do enjoy it, but it's a way that I can share information. Hopefully, it's valuable to a variety of people. I'm going to continue to do that. I absolutely always appreciate the engagement with my content, but I'm also hopefully going to do a little bit more with it. So we'll see exactly what that means here in the next 3 or 4 months, but maybe a little bit beyond LinkedIn, hopefully is the goal. But that is probably the best way to reach out to me, directly is follow me on LinkedIn, message me on LinkedIn, also email nate@lpfspendmanagement.com, and company website is lpfspendmanagement.com.